My promotion dinner was supposed to be the proudest night of my life. I had worked 6 years at the same company, skipped vacations, stayed late every Friday, and turned down 2 job offers just to prove I was loyal. My manager had reserved the private dining room at the nicest restaurant in town. 40 people were coming. My mother-in-law stood up, clinked her glass, smiled at the room and said, "Let's raise a toast to my son." Because without him pushing her, she never would have gotten this far. My husband didn't clap. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded envelope and said, "Actually, I think there's something everyone here should read first. I need to back up. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, where my mother-in-law, Sandra, was the kind of woman who ran every school committee, chaired every neighborhood board, and made sure everyone within a 10-mile radius knew exactly how much she had done for them. She was the type of person who gave gifts and then listed them back to you later, when she needed something. She remembered every favor. She never forgot a debt. I met my husband Daniel when we were both 24. He was warm and funny and nothing like her, which I later understood was either a miracle or an act of quiet rebellion that he had been performing his entire life. We dated for 2 years. His mother was polite to me during that time. Careful, measured. The way a person is polite when they are still deciding whether you are a threat. When Daniel proposed, Sandra did not call to congratulate me. She called Daniel. I was sitting right next to him. He put the phone on speaker without thinking, and I heard her say, "She's a sweet girl, but are you sure she's ready for the kind of life you're building? She doesn't exactly come from the same background." Daniel told her that was not a conversation he was going to have. She laughed lightly, as if he had said something charming and changed the subject. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself she needed time. We got married in the spring. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Sandra gave a toast at the reception that was 8 minutes long and mentioned Daniel's childhood accomplishments 4 times. She mentioned me once to note that Daniel had always had a soft spot for people who needed guidance. I smiled. I held my champagne glass. I told myself she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I was very good at telling myself things. The first year of our marriage, Sandra called Daniel every Sunday morning. Not Sunday afternoon, not Saturday evening, Sunday morning before I was fully awake, because she knew that was when I was least likely to be present in the conversation. I would come downstairs and find him standing in the kitchen talking to her in a low voice, and when I walked in, the conversation would shift. She would ask to say hello to me. She would be warm and breezy for exactly 90 seconds, and then find a reason to get off the phone. She started dropping comments slowly, the way you ease into cold water. "Claire seems stressed lately, Daniel. Is everything okay at home?" She said this to him at a family dinner when I had been promoted to senior analyst and was working 12-hour days. I noticed Claire didn't bring anything to Thanksgiving this year. "I'm sure she's just busy." I had brought a pie. It was on the counter. She walked past it 3 times without acknowledging it. She had a gift for making things disappear. When I was 27, I applied for a director-level position at my company. I was the youngest person on the shortlist. My direct manager, a woman named Patricia, had been mentoring me for 2 years and had told me plainly that she was recommending me. The interview process took 6 weeks. I made it to the final round. Then I was told the position had gone to an external candidate. 3 months later, I found out why. One of the HR coordinators, a woman I had become friendly with, mentioned in passing that during the reference check process, someone had called the main office line asking about me. Not through the official reference channel, through the front desk. The coordinator didn't know who it was, but she remembered the call because the person had implied, carefully and without saying anything technically false, that I had a tendency to take credit for collaborative work, that I was ambitious in a way that could be divisive, that I was still developing the maturity the role required. I didn't know it was Sandra then. I only suspected. Suspicion without proof is just a feeling that eats you from the inside, so I pushed it down and kept working. The next 2 years, I rebuilt. I took on projects no one else wanted. I trained 3 people who were later promoted above me, and I did it without complaint. Patricia never stopped advocating for me. When the company announced a regional director opening, she came to my desk personally and told me to apply. I did. I made it through every round. I was offered the position on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes and then walked back to my desk and finished my reports. Daniel was the first person I called. He was so happy he started laughing before I finished the sentence. He said we had to celebrate. He called his mother to share the news, because that was the kind of son he was. And Sandra said, "Oh, how wonderful. I always knew hard work would pay off for her eventually." She paused. "You must have been such a support to her, Daniel. These things don't happen in a vacuum." Daniel told me about the call that night. He said his mother was happy for me. I nodded. I started planning the dinner. The dinner was Daniel's idea. He wanted to do something significant, something that honored how long I had worked toward this. He helped me put together the guest list. Colleagues, close friends, a few family members on both sides. Sandra was invited because she was Daniel's mother and because I believed, or wanted to believe, that I was above keeping score. She RSVP'd yes immediately. The restaurant had a private room with a long table and warm lighting. Patricia came. 3 of my closest friends from the office came. Daniel's college roommate came with his wife. On Sandra's side, there was Sandra, her sister Margot, and Sandra's closest friend Diane, who I had met exactly twice and who had both times made a point of asking me where I had gone to college. The evening started beautifully. The food was excellent. People were laughing. Patricia gave a short, genuine toast that made several people tear up, because she talked about watching me grow over 6 years, and she said I had earned every part of what I was being given. My friend Renee clinked her glass and said, "To Claire, who always did the work and never made you feel bad for not keeping up." Then Sandra stood up. She didn't wait for an opening. She just stood, and the room quieted the way rooms do when someone with a certain kind of presence demands silence. She smiled. She looked around the table. She said, "I just want to add a few words because this is a family celebration too." She talked about Daniel for 3 minutes. She talked about how hard he worked, how he had built a stable home, how he had provided the kind of steady foundation that allowed a spouse to take professional risks. She said, "We all know that behind every successful woman is a partner who believed in her, and Daniel has always been that for Claire." She raised her glass. She said, "So let's toast to my son." Because without him pushing her, she never would have gotten this far. People looked at their plates. Renee looked at me. Patricia's expression went very still. I felt the heat come up the back of my neck. I had spent 6 years in that company. I had worked while Daniel was traveling for his own job. I had worked when I was sick. I had worked through the 2 months after my father's heart surgery when I couldn't sleep and could barely eat. And I had still delivered every project on deadline. I had done this without Sandra's son pushing me, without anyone pushing me, because I was the one who decided that my life was going to be something, regardless of what anyone implied about my readiness, or my maturity, or my background. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. I did not know what was in the envelope. He had not told me. He pulled it out and set it on the table, and he said in a voice that was completely calm, "Before we close out the toasts, I'd like to read something." Sandra looked at him. Her smile stayed on, but her eyes changed. He unfolded the paper. He said, "This is a letter. I want to be clear about what it is before I read it, because some people at this table know about it, and some people don't." He looked at Sandra. He said, "This is the letter you wrote to HR at Claire's company 3 years ago, using your email address at the consulting firm, recommending against her promotion to director." The room was completely silent. He read it. It was not a long letter. It was precise and professional, and it used phrases like concerns about leadership readiness and feedback from mutual contacts in her professional circle. It cited no sources. It named no specifics, but it was written in Sandra's voice, which I recognized immediately once I heard it. Careful, measured, nothing technically false, nothing you could grab onto, just the steady accumulation of doubt. Diane put her glass down. Margot, Sandra's own sister, sat back in her chair. Sandra said, "That is a private communication and I don't know how you obtained it." Daniel said, "Patricia obtained it through a formal records request after the HR coordinator reported the unsolicited contact to compliance. Patricia has had it for 8 months. She gave it to me 2 weeks ago because she thought I should know what was done to my wife." Patricia looked directly at Sandra and said nothing. She didn't need to. Sandra said, "I was protecting my son. I had concerns about the dynamic in your marriage and Daniel said. "Mom, stop." He did not raise his voice. He folded the letter back along its crease and he placed it in the center of the table and he said, "Claire earned this promotion. She earned the one 3 years ago too. You took that from her. I need you to understand that I know that now, and everyone in this room knows it." Of the 40 people at that dinner, 11 left with Sandra. The remaining 29 stayed. Renee ordered another bottle of wine. Patricia gave a second toast, shorter than the first, that ended with, "To Claire, who got here entirely on her own." Margot came to find me near the end of the evening. She pulled me aside near the hallway by the coat check, and she said in a low voice, "I told her not to. 2 years ago, when she told me what she was doing, I told her it was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't know what to do with that." I thanked her and I went back to the table. Daniel and I didn't talk in the car on the way home, not because we were angry with each other, because there was too much to say, and neither of us had found the shape of it yet. He drove and I watched the streetlights pass and I thought about the version of myself who had sat across from a hiring manager 6 years ago and believed, truly believed, that if she just worked hard enough, the outcome would eventually be fair. When we got home, he sat down on the couch and put his face in his hands. Not crying. Just the posture of a man who has absorbed something heavy and hasn't put it down yet. I sat next to him. He said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." I said, "You saw it when it mattered." He said, "That's not the same thing." He was right. It wasn't. I didn't tell him it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and we had been married long enough that I had stopped saying things just to make discomfort end faster. I said, "I know. But we're here now." The next morning, I called Patricia. She had been the one to walk me through the compliance process, the one who had filed the internal report, the one who had spent 8 months deciding whether to tell Daniel or tell me directly. She had chosen Daniel because she thought it would land differently, and she was right. I don't know if I would have believed it from her. I might have found a way to doubt it. Daniel holding the letter in his hands that I could not doubt. Patricia said, "I'm sorry it happened in public." I said, "I needed it to happen in public." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think that's true." Sandra did not reach out to me. She called Daniel twice in the week that followed. He took the first call. He told me afterward that she had said she believed she was acting in his best interest, and that she stood by her concern for their family. He didn't take the second call. The hardest part was not the anger. The anger was clean and it had somewhere to go. The hardest part was sitting with the shape of the last 3 years, running my finger along the edges of it, and understanding how much had been quietly removed from my life without my knowing. The promotion I didn't get. The months I spent thinking I hadn't been good enough. The performance review where I'd added an additional certification because I thought I needed to be stronger in that area, when in fact the decision had already been made for reasons that had nothing to do with my skills. I think about the woman who called HR, who sat down, thought through the right words, found the exact register of concern that sounds professional rather than personal, and pressed send. I think about what it costs a person to do that, what you have to believe about yourself, about your right to manage other people's outcomes, to make that choice, and then show up to Thanksgiving and hand me a gift, and ask about my job with a smile. I don't have an answer. I've stopped looking for one. What I have instead is this: Patricia nominated me for a second regional position 6 months after the dinner. I was approved in the first review cycle. No second round. No months of waiting. I got the call on a Thursday morning and I walked outside into the parking lot and stood in the cold air for a few minutes just breathing. Daniel's Aunt Margot sent me a card. It said simply, "You were always the right person." Some of us just took too long to say so. I have it on my desk. There are people in your life who will smile at you while they work against you. And the terrifying thing is that for a long time you will not know. You will absorb the outcome of their interference and mistake it for information about yourself. You will work harder, certify more, sleep less, and believe that the gap between where you are and where you deserve to be is a reflection of your own insufficiency. It is not. Sometimes the gap is someone else's hand. I spent 6 years building something that someone tried to dismantle quietly, from a distance, with careful language and a composed face. It didn't work. Not because I was lucky, and not because the truth always comes out on its own. It often doesn't. It worked because Patricia kept a record, because Daniel chose his wife over his mother's version of their marriage, and because one HR coordinator remembered an unusual phone call and reported it the way she was trained to. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that don't feel like rescue until you're standing in a parking lot in the cold, breathing the air of a job you actually earned, and realizing that the story you were told about yourself was never the true one. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. I am a regional director. I did this. I used to think the hardest thing about being undermined was the moment you found out. I was wrong. The hardest thing is the time before, all those months you spend doubting yourself, tightening your standards, pushing harder, sleeping less, convinced that the distance between where you were and where you deserve to be was a measurement of your own lack. That is the real damage. Not the letter, not the phone call to HR, the version of yourself you quietly became while trying to close a gap that someone else had manufactured. What Sandra did was calculated. She didn't scream at me or insult me at a family dinner. She used language that sounded like concern. She positioned interference as love. That is a particular kind of harm, the kind that leaves no visible mark and makes the person receiving it question their own perception. For 3 years I questioned mine. I thought I needed to be more. I didn't understand that the problem was not my ceiling. It was someone's hand pressed against it. The reason it unraveled was not luck. Patricia kept records because she understood that institutions have memory, and memory has consequences. Daniel chose clarity over comfort because he had spent years watching someone he loved work harder than anyone around her and still come up short, and eventually the math stopped adding up. And one person in an HR office remembered a phone call and did her job. None of these were dramatic acts. They were ordinary people doing what integrity looks like in practice. Quiet, unglamorous, and necessary. There is something worth sitting with in that. The people who tried to hold Claire back made a calculated choice. The people who helped her did not. They were just doing what they believed was right, and yet the outcome was entirely different for each side. That asymmetry is not accidental. Actions that are built on diminishing someone else are structurally unstable. They require constant maintenance. They depend on silence and on the target never finding out. The moment one variable changes, the whole architecture collapses. Actions built on honesty, on keeping a record, on telling the truth in a room full of people, those hold. I think about who I want to be, not in the large dramatic moments, but in the small ones. The moment I decide whether to say something or stay silent. The moment I choose whether to keep a record or let it go. The moment I decide whether to protect someone who cannot see what is being done to them. Those small choices are the ones that compound. They build into the kind of person who either stands in a parking lot on a cold Thursday morning feeling the full weight of something genuinely earned, or the kind of person who has to keep pressing down on someone else's ceiling to feel tall. Claire worked. She was honest. She did not stop when it became clear the game was tilted. That is not a minor thing. That is the entire thing. Resilience is not the absence of being knocked down. It is the decision, made quietly and without audience, to keep building anyway. And when the truth finally arrived, in an envelope, at a dinner table, in front of everyone, it landed with the full force of 6 years of uninterrupted integrity behind it. That is not something anyone can manufacture for you. And it is not something anyone can permanently take away.